Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast, the official podcast for the fan site AvatarTheLastAirbenderOnline.com. This is going to be our Legend of Korra Turf Wars Part 3 review special. We're going to be going through the book completely in a lot of detail, so this is the perfect opportunity to, if you have the book already, grab your copy of it and follow along with us as we go through it. I'm going to be your host for this podcast, Morgan Airspeed Prime, and joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Let's get into the most recently released piece of Avatar merchandise, and that is Legend of Korra Turf Wars Part 3, the final part of the Turf Wars trilogy. And it's been out in comic book stores for a while now, and then it's going to be released on this upcoming Tuesday everywhere else. Basically, the digital version is going to be out. It'll be available in normal bookstores from Amazon. Basically, mass market release is this upcoming Tuesday. So yeah, let's just get into this like usual. Writer is Michael Dante DiMartino, artist is Irene Ko, and we'll jump pretty much straight in with some initial thoughts. So Greg, what were your thoughts overall on the final part of Turf Wars Part 3?
Overall, I thought it was good. I wasn't sort of like, I don't think I was blown away by it, but I think, I think it came to, I think some of the questions that we had before as far as would they be able to answer it or would it give us some of the resolutions to it. I think, this book at least attempted to sort of start to touch on them. It still feels like there's, more to the story, which I think they sort of indicate. But, I think it's a good way to sort of end, I guess, this sort of trilogy off.
Yeah, for me, I think it's fairly similar to Part 2, where, like, average okay is about where I kind of settle on the book, where there's not a lot of, like, amazing things to praise from it. At the same time, there's not a lot to, like, really heavily criticize, because just, I think, the scope of the story isn't that big, and there's some interesting stuff, some of it's not as interesting. It felt like just this was the sort of stuff they needed to get out of the way in the first comic, and hopefully we can move on to better things. It was fine, but, I suppose the question sort of comes up, is it okay that we just have this book we've waited so long for and it's just okay? Like, should our expectations not be higher? And I think it's in that sense, I'd lean to being a little bit more critical just because I expect more from this franchise. And I think it will be better in the future comics now that some of this stuff's out of the way. But, as I said there, doesn't do a lot wrong, doesn't do a lot that's great, so it's just average kind of by default. But let's go through it page by page. There are some kind of good moments, and we'll get to them. So we open up in the Creeping Crystal Triad headquarters, and one thing we get in the background here is them. I suppose in the papers it's been announced Zhu Li Moon is running against Raiko in the presidential race, so everyone's finding out about this. They're all kind of talking about different things. They know Tokuga's turned into some kind of a monster, and then someone's talking about the best way to get bloodstains out of something. Jargal is just playing like pool or snooker, and then they hear some rumbling outside, and it turns out it's Tokuga who's come to attack the Creeping Crystals, who are basically the only remaining enemy triad. So basically he comes at them, overwhelming force. Jargala and the rest of them are forced to basically flee because there's no point in even fighting what they're up against here. And that covers about the first 3 pages of the book. Is just that the Creeping Crystals have been taken out here more or less by Tokuga, and Jargala wants kind of revenge for what's just happened here. So what are your thoughts on this opening scene from the book?
Yeah, definitely. I think we mentioned this before, but it definitely sort of gets right into things with Tortuga sort of, taking his massive, forces that he has now from the depot that he got to sort of take things over basically here. And yeah, it pretty much is one-sided here. There's not, even though Jargala does want to sort of fight back, this is definitely a fight that they can't win, at least not at this time here. So no, they definitely, I guess, if anything else, it definitely shows you, Tortuga's sort of strength now that he has these mecha tanks and, the everything behind him now. So it definitely seems like he has a definite advantage in the triads now.
Mm-hmm. Next, we cut over to the central spirit portal, the new one, and we have the United Forces here who are obviously kind of blockading the portal, allowing no one in or out. Iroh's in charge, and we see this kind of exodus in a way, like tons of sky bison flying over from Air Temple Island, and Iroh knows he's in for a little bit of a trouble here, and immediately Tenzin comes over, and like, you know, Milo wants to fight, but Tenzin obviously is like, this is a peaceful protest, non-violent, and they both of them want to have a resolution, and I suppose Tenzin is aware that Iroh has to follow orders, and as much as Iroh would want to help the airbenders out, he is under those orders. So it's an interesting dynamic here of like, we know Iroh's a good guy, but it's just that the guy who's in charge right now, Raiko, is making some pretty poor decisions, and Iroh knows he's going to be in for a kind of frustrating day here, dealing with you know, a stubborn Tenzin and airbenders who he really has no way to properly handle them, especially with knowing the way Raiko's going to want to handle this. So yeah, this is the protest that we got set up in part 2, but what are your thoughts on these couple of pages?
Yeah, no, it's interesting to see how they actually sort of go about, protesting here, or at least just the start of it. But yeah, no, it's I don't know, it's interesting just to see, just the situation in general, just sort of how, one just sort of has to follow orders, or, is looking to at least attempt to follow orders, even though he probably knows the whole sort of situation isn't, being handled sort of best way here. So I don't know, it's definitely interesting seeing, Iroh in this sort of situation here.
Mm-hmm. And next we cut over to most of our hero characters. We have Mako, Bolin, Korra, and Lin on top of a building, and they're just watching kind of what's happening as Tokuga makes his way through the city. Korra wants to jump straight in, but Tokuga is threatening anyone who kind of goes to leave their apartments, so everyone's kind of stuck in. There's danger, so they can't immediately act. And Korra's frustrated because she obviously wants to immediately help, because the big thing from part 2 was that Asami was kidnapped right at the end. Lin tries to sort of help Korra, calm her down here. She says she's sorry, she heard about the two of them being together, and she promises that we'll get her out of harm's way. And Korra just says, thanks, Asami and I have been in tough spots before, but this time feels different. So Korra's very, very worried about this situation. But yeah, just getting across that Lin knows about their relationship, and this is her kind of like, I'm okay with it type moment, which we've had from a couple of the characters now, and it's just a nice little moment with Lin here. But what are your thoughts on this scene?
Yeah, no, it definitely is a nice little moment that they have here. And I don't know, it's interesting, I guess, just to see the scope of Tortuga's, I guess, sort of his forces now, that he can, pretty much threaten a whole sort of like neighborhood of the city. And I guess, he just has it, all sort of like blockaded, and like, with all of his forces here. So I don't know, I don't know, it always surprised me, because I don't know, I didn't seem like he had that much of a scale of forces, but I guess, just with everything and just having, I don't know, the resources that he's gathered recently, I guess he has more, I don't know, more control than it seemed initially that he did have here. But yeah, no, it's definitely a dire situation. You can see the worry on Korra's face here. And I guess, I guess the situation does feel a bit more dire than previous ones. I don't know, I think they have been in, pretty sort of, I guess, sort of sticky situations now. So I'm not sure if this feels so much more different than the other ones, but, it definitely is pretty serious nonetheless.
Yeah, I'm assuming the different is mainly just that this time, because they're actually in a like open relationship that they've told people about now, and that's where it comes from. But we cut to Asami, and we find out that Asami has been put basically in prison, more or less, with Wonyong, who was obviously previously taken out, and he goes to try and talk to her. He mentions that she hasn't said 2 words to him since they were put down here together. And she kind of finally snaps and says, don't pretend like you care, your greed put us in this situation. And he kind of tries to argue his point that he was trying to turn catastrophe into an opportunity, but the airbenders got in the way. And she brings up the point that you send criminals to threaten and intimidate people, and that is the whole point. He hired Tokuga back in like the first part to like cause most of this stuff. And he points out that, running a successful business sometimes requires unsavory partnerships. But I'm sure you learned all about that from your father. And Asami snaps at this again, mentioning that, he has no right to talk about her father, because I didn't speak to him for years because of his ties with Amon, but in the end he regretted what he had done and he sacrificed his life to help save Republic City. What are you willing to sacrifice? And at this point, Tokuga walks in. But what are your thoughts on this? I suppose second maybe in the entire series interaction between Asami and Wonyong-kun?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it's interesting to sort of get sort of I don't know, their sort of point of views of things and just sort of I don't know, just interesting getting to see here and even the next section, sort of the history that Wonlong has with, Sami's father and just, operating, these businesses in the city where I guess you just sometimes have to look the other way for certain situations here. But no, it's definitely, I don't know, it's nice to get more bit from Asami here just to see her, sort of really sort of speak her mind at this point.
Mm. Yeah, I think my only problem with this is that I was hoping for some Asami development to come out of this book and this series, but in the end they brought it back to what's always been the thing with Asami, where like they can't seem to do anything with her that doesn't in some way involve her father, and it more seems again like Won and they're trying to establish this kind of connection between Asami and him when it's more of actually the history between Hiroshi and Won that's actually brought up in this book. So it's this weird thing where like post death, like Hiroshi's getting more development than even Asami is as a character. Like as we'll get to, like she does all the Asami things that you expect, the fighting and so on, the piloting, the mechanical stuff. You're not really getting too much on her specifically because it's just playing off the talking about her father's stuff again. So I think that's been a constant frustration with a lot of Asami stuff across both the seasons of the show and now this comic. I hope they manage to give her some kind of solo stuff on her own. But anyway, we move on, and obviously Tokuga comes in, and he basically says that the Avatar hasn't suffered enough for what she did to me. And again, Asami tries to point out the really obvious thing that like everyone is aware of, that like Korra didn't do that. You more or less kind of did that yourself. And he says, how noble of you to defend your girlfriend. And we get this whole reaction of like, how do you know? And it's revealed that Tokuga was actually spying on Asami beforehand. And then he brings up the fact that, oh, you're like a mechanic, you know stuff about machinery, I need you to make one of these. And Asami points out that it's one of her father's drawings. And it turns out that what this is a gas dispersion pump. And it's this kind of biological weapon, basically, gas weapon, which is kind of pretty crazy. And it's revealed that Tokuga has this because it was in one of Won-Young-kun's safes, but he reveals that he got it from Hiroshi years ago. And the reason Won-Young walked out on the deal with Hiroshi, which was set up I think in like part 1, was because Hiroshi wanted to start making illegal weapons. So it's more or less implying that like in or around the Amon, joining up with Amon thing, he probably tried to get Won-Young involved in that, but Won-Young actually refused. So, giving Won-Young a little bit of a, like, morality here, that he's talking about making all these tough business decisions, but he kind of put his foot down, at least on this one. Yeah, Asami's kind of like, you want to make knockout gas, but they more or less say it like, poison gas is actually what he wants to make. So he's planning to kill people, not just knock them out with this. And this is his big scheme. This is his end game goal of like threatening the entire city with like deadly gas. So I think it's a interesting enough plan. You understand how kind of lethal it is in the end. But again, with Asami, it's like, okay, Hiroshi comes back into play with Asami once again. In that, like, I almost would have liked it a little better if it was just like, here's what I want to do, Asami, make me a system to release gas, and she comes up with it on her own, rather than her just making Hiroshi's design, basically. It gets across her skills, but this would have got it across, I think, a little better if they did it that way. But what were your thoughts on this as being the big kind of reveal of Tokuga's plan?
I mean, as far as the reveal, I think it was good enough to see, as far as how far he was willing to go for his actual plans. I mean, this is, poison gas is a pretty, drastic thing to do. Any sort of biological weapon is, one of those things that people just, you just don't get behind regardless of anything else. So the fact that he's willing to go to this length for his plans just shows the seriousness of his sort of situation here. And yeah, I guess it does sort of show that, Wong isn't such, he isn't the worst sort of, businessman ever. The fact that he wouldn't make this sort of device or wouldn't participate in making this device. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's interesting that it is, one of Hiroshi's sort of like original designs, but and I don't know. I mean, I guess it does take a little bit away from Asami as far as character development, as far as that goes. I mean, I don't know if it would have made much of a difference if he just happened to have these plans or he found these plans somewhere else versus them being her father's actual plans here as far as giving her more character development. I think there's probably better ways that they could have actually done that as far as making her seem more independent or just showing her in a different sort of situation than here. So I don't know, it doesn't bother me as much that is from her father, but I think there's just more that they could have just done with her in general here that would have just progress her character further.
Hmm. And Asami initially doesn't want to do this. She's not going to help him take the city hostage, basically. And Tokuga gets her to do this by threatening to basically kill Wonyong by choking him with his kind of tentacle arm. And eventually, Asami doesn't want to see someone killed just because she's refusing to do something, and is forced to agree to actually make this machine. And Tokuga just says, "Smart girl, I knew you'd see reason." But that's just nice showing you that, like, I suppose kind of like Asami with her father, where she eventually was willing to try again with him back in book 4, even though she has reason to kind of dislike Wanyang, still doesn't want to see him die. I don't think it's anything crazy character-wise. It's just like the hero making the obvious decision, but Tokuga being somewhat threatening, willing to kill someone to make this happen. But do you have any thoughts on Asami saving him here?
Yeah, no, it's sort of what you would expect from your hero character here.
Hmm. Next, we cut over to President Raiko, who's reading the paper, which is obviously announcing Zhu Li's candidacy, and he immediately is like, "Oh, face it, this election's over. People want a fresh face, a new start." His campaign manager says, "Zhu Li's a nobody, a former assistant with no government experience." And Raiko's pointing out that she helped the evacuees. People like her authenticity, and his campaign manager says it's all an act. She's been taking advantage of their misery for her own gain. And Raiko points out that while I was cowering during Kavura's invasion, she was helping the Avatar take down the Mecha Giant. She's a hero. And he tries to spin this in the way where it makes her look bad. No, she's reckless, irresponsible, foolhardy. And he's beginning to convince Raiko, when I'm through spinning this, no one will want to vote for Zhu Li. And it's then shown that the page comes in and mentions that there's another crisis, the airbenders have showed up at the portal and are refusing to leave. And Raiko decides that this is not a crisis, it's an opportunity to change the narrative, and the campaign manager has got through to Raiko again. I suppose given where they go with Raiko in this book, it's a bit like, okay, that's a nice little attempt to kind of bring him around, but then he just kind of ends up making the same sort of decisions he always makes in this book, and there's no real sense of them doing anything with him. So for the entirety of Turf Wars, it's just felt like, yeah, you're meant to dislike Raiko. Yeah, there's some tough situations that he's dealing with, but he's still just making the wrong decisions, and there's no reason to not support Zhu Li at all. So they don't even lean into that the campaign manager is the entire reason behind this, because he's still sort of that's who Raiko is, and it's just that this guy's sort of amplifying that. It's a nice enough scene. I just I'm still a little confused about their portrayal of Raiko over the course of this book and what they were really trying to do. But what are your thoughts on this scene with Raiko?
I don't know. I thought it was interesting at first. I was like, oh, Raiko can actually see some of his like own sort of failings here. But yeah, you're right. At the end of it, it seems like he sort of just, goes back to his own, his normal sort of self here. I mean, it is a nice sort of line, the opportunity to change the narrative, but that's sort of, he's doing it almost all for sort of like the wrong reasons. And then when you actually see him go through with his act, it's like, he definitely, I don't know. He seems like he's just a very sort of, I guess, sort of slow learner, which I guess in the end doesn't work for him at all.
Mm. Yeah, it's weird because we'll get to it, but like, there's no moment where he ever like takes the like advantage really over Zhu Li, and like Zhu Li's put in a bad position after this, and then through whatever Zhu Li does, kind of takes it back. It's just he comes in immediately, sort of makes the wrong decision, and then Zhu Li just makes herself look even better. So, um, it's just a kind of weird setup for what they do later on. But we cut back to on the rooftop with Korra and Mako and so on. For what I feel is probably one of, if not potentially my favorite scenes in the book. And yeah, Mako decides that now is the opportunity to talk to Korra about things. And I like the scene in that, like, you can tell there's a little bit of awkwardness. You just get kind of Mako calling from off panel, "Hey Korra," and she just says "Hey." Then there's a panel with no speech bubbles, and she asks, "Is your arm feeling any better?" And Mako says, "Not really. I've been seeing Kaya for treatments, but I still can't firebend with it." And she says, "Oh, sorry." So I think we'll stop there just with the whole Mako's injury thing. That's an interesting like decision to just kind of be like, oh, like he's still injured and there's no real progress made with the injury. So I'm not sure if we're meant to like really interpret it as like Mako's going to be out of action for a while. I get it's basically selling the magnitude of what he did in the finale and how badly injured he was, how desperate that situation was, but I think is it worth like keeping him out of action for so long just to have him have an injury for a while? Like, I'm not really sure where exactly they're going with this. In that, I suppose when this happened, I was more thinking like, oh, and then is Korra gonna step up and maybe heal him, and that will make the progress on it? But that doesn't really happen. But because they're sort of closer after this scene, maybe that will happen. What's your take on them kind of saying this about his injury at this point?
I don't know. I mean, he did use, his arms, I guess, in, one of the other books, so maybe that sort of set him back a bit. I mean, I wouldn't expect him to still be injured by, whenever the next book comes out, whatever sort of like time difference they put between the two books or whatever. But I don't know, it definitely seems like they are trying to sort of show that it was, I guess, more serious than we thought. I mean, I don't know, he's still able to sort of like fight and be in action, even if he does have his arms. So it's not like he's completely like defenseless or out of it. It's just sort of odd to, still see him in a sling after so long. Usually they don't, for our main characters at least, usually they don't show that they're, hurt for that long. So it's odd in that regard, but I don't know. I think it serves its purpose here, and with what happens with him and Bolin by the end of the book, I could see him being fine by the next time we see him. So I don't think there's too much to worry about it.
Yeah, I suppose at this point I maybe prefer them to almost like if you're committing to doing something with it, like tell us like the specifics of the injury, like because he says he can't firebend with it, that makes me believe that like the injury is like so deep that it like has affected like the chi paths in his arm, which is why he wouldn't be able to bend with it. But it's still in a sling, so that suggests that there's like an overall like kind of structure kind of problem still with the arm. So is it like twofold, and like the healing of his arm in terms of just being able to move it again is coming back, but the chi network stuff not so much? But that's just, I suppose, maybe me being overly technical. But anyway, Mako kind of, this is his opportunity. He asks, "How are you doing?" And she says, "Not so great either. I can't shake what Tokuga said about my actions having consequences. Maybe if I had stopped the eel spirit from attacking Tokuga instead of helping Asami, none of this would have been happening right now." Mako says, "Tokuga's unhinged. He's just trying to mess with your head. Don't let him. I remember when Tarlock captured you, I kept blaming myself and going out of my mind with worry." And she's like, "You did?" And he says, "I know what you're going through. That's why I want to help you find Asami." And Korra says, "What about the triple threats?" And Mako says, I think I know a way to search for Asami without tipping them off, but I'll explain later. Beifong can't know what we're up to." And Korra hugs Mako now and says, "Thanks for being so understanding, Mako." And then this is where he says it. Mako says, "And I want you to know, if you've noticed me acting a little weird, it's only because I've never had one of my exes date another one of my exes before. It's taking a little getting used to. But I think you and Asami are both perfect for each other, and I'm the most qualified person to say that." And we kind of cut away with that. It's perhaps not exactly the scene that I kind of maybe wanted, and maybe I wished Asami was there as well, in that they don't really have a Mako Asami scene in the whole book, but it's the more significant relationship of like Mako and the girl, so I think this is definitely one of the best scenes in the whole book. It accomplished what it needed to. I hope that just means that we're done with the whole Mako is awkward kind of plot point, and he can just be part of the friend group now. And I think him going as far as to say that he thinks they're perfect for each other should accomplish that, and we can kind of get Mako onto his path of like doing some police work, getting through the injury, and kind of maybe setting him up as the next chief of police or something like that. Treating him a little bit more seriously, giving him a plot now that this is over. But I liked how they did this. I actually liked that they had the hug kind of take place before Mako even addressed the relationship stuff. Just that she was happy to see Mako doing a little bit like, "Oh, we won't tell Chief about this. We'll find some way to go about it behind her back," and she appreciates him trying to help her out, like, personally. So yeah, I think probably my favorite scene in the whole book. But Greg, what are your thoughts on this kind of scene we were sort of anticipating, given the way we've kind of thought about the whole Mako and Asami thing could have went?
Yeah, no, I think it is, really good that we finally get this sort of resolution here and the way that, they go about it. I mean, I don't know if it'll ever, not be super weird for Mako just in general, just because, he can be an odd sort of character like that. But I think, this will definitely be sort of what sets, the group to sort of being back to sort of the way that they used to be. So I think this definitely, this definitely was sort of the resolution that we were looking for. I mean, I think it, maybe it would have been cooler if Asami was there, but, with the way that everything's going in this book and, how they set up things, I think, this is probably the best that we could have got it here, unless they do something, later on where Asami's sort of in the picture as well. But no, I think this is definitely a good way to finally sort of get past, all of this weirdness that they've been having.
Mm-hmm. Next, we cut back over to the portal with the airbenders, and Milo's kind of worried about how long they'll have to stand there, and Tenzin's like, for a stubborn man like him, it could take weeks, maybe longer. And Milo's like, "You mean we might be here forever?" As Raiko comes in, and his decision to change the narrative is that to go in with like a megaphone and basically say, "Evacuate or you'll be forced out." And Tenzin's just like, draw back the United Forces. We're here to bring attention to the fact that, people intend to misuse this portal, and they just kind of go back and forth like this. And Raiko just says, "Send in the waterbenders to Iroh," and Tenzin's just like, "Stand your ground, don't retaliate no matter what happens." And the United Forces waterbenders just start like dousing all of the airbenders with waterbending, as they just kind of stand there. And Iroh's just like to Raiko, "You've made your point, can we call them off?" And Raiko's like, "Not yet." And he has to point out that like they're not fighting back, there's no cause for this. And eventually Raiko's forced to order them to stop, but he doesn't like order them to retreat. So the airbenders are soaked after all of this, and they're kind of preparing for what might happen next. And then Zhu Li comes in with some earthbenders and breaks down the walls that they'd set up around the portal. So it's kind of all coming apart for Raiko here, as he's making all the wrong decisions. But yeah, this is where some of the confusion comes from. He's going to change the narrative by doing exactly the wrong thing, in that like the airbenders just had the complete perfect kind of response to this, in that they're already well respected, but then you like attacking them for no reason is like not going to help anything. So Raiko comes across very badly from this. I'm not sure what they were going for, but what are your thoughts on these couple of pages?
Yeah, no, I thought this was definitely. I mean, yeah, his change in narrative is definitely not going, the way that you would want it to go in any sort of situation here, and the fact that he has to have it pointed out to him by someone else that this is not right thing to do. I don't know. It's definitely a really sort of serious situation of him just sort of having these waterbenders just douse people, which unfortunately has been done in our world too as well. So it's definitely a bad situation that he's in, just doing this. So yeah, no, it's definitely not a good look for him.
Hmm. So everyone's shocked to see Zhu Li, especially Raiko, and the campaign manager's like, "Oh, she brought her own camera crew. That's a great move." And it's Varric, of course, who's leading the docu-mover, as he calls it. Um, and he wants to make sure that the frame is shot so that the portal is behind Zhu Li. And she immediately goes over to Tenzin, shakes his hand, and is like, I want to begin, dialogue about the portal's future. And she talks like basically to the camera and the people that the portal shouldn't be held hostage by businessmen or politicians. It's a symbol of harmony and peace and should be shared by all. And she calls on Raiko to, draw down the troops, take them away. And the people start screaming, "Bring peace to the portal! Bring peace to the portal!" As it's this kind of standoff between Zhu Li and Raiko here, and we kind of cut away from it at that point. But it's clear like Zhu Li has just kind of handled this perfectly, of just coming in there, kind of saving the airbenders a little bit, and just the contrast between her being on good terms with the Air Nation leader versus Raiko, who just doused them with water. So the whole like Zhu Li, don't like Raiko kind of thing from this book is going pretty well so far. But what were your thoughts on this? I suppose Varric really being properly involved for the first time.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is probably the best role that he could have in this sort of situation, just being sort of like the publicist basically for Zhu Li. And, he definitely knows how to publicize things for good and for bad. So, this time for once he's doing it for the good reasons here. So, yeah, no, it's interesting to see him sort of, set up the scene as, this is, a real time event sort of actually going here, and just, seeing Zhu Li, sort of able to sort of speak her mind and speak pretty much what people want to hear about the situation going on. I think does really well here. You can definitely see the contrast between the two leaders here and what they're sort of going for here.
Hmm. Then we cut to Mako, Bolin, and Mako in the police car, and they arrive at, I suppose, that the new hideout that the Creeping Crystals, what's left of them, is hiding in, and they both kind of spot each other. Jargala decides to let them in because she's obviously met with Korra before, um, and she's just like, so you're here to apologize for falsely accusing me, and no, they actually want to make a deal, and she's basically Korra offers her a shot at Tokuga effectively. After all of this, she's going to help Jargala get her revenge on this, and more or less, she agrees to this eventually. And there's a sense of her also kind of wanting to help Korra out, having met with Korra and Asami before. She just tells them a little bit of a story here. Do you know how my triad got its name? From genomite, the original creeping crystal. When it comes into contact with organic matter, genomite starts to grow and grow until there's no escape. And she threatens Tokuga by saying, he's about to discover why the creeping crystals were once the most feared triad in Republic City. So this is cool. I like the callback to creeping crystal, genomite, King Boomy, and seeing her
Yeah.
kind of use it there. Really cool little reference. And Jargal is probably one of the better new characters that they have here, even though she's not overly used, but it feels like with the triple threats kind of up in the air after this, she kind of, her acting as the main like triad leader in the aftermath of this, cool enough position, nice enough character. I think this has been one of the more kind of successful parts of the like triad plot from this book. So I thought this was actually fairly well done, and this whole plot of like the unusual relationship, I suppose, with Jargala and like Korra effectively. But what were your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I think this, as far as her being like our new, character here in this sort of series here, I think, she works pretty well as far as, being one to sort of, I guess, help the group, even though she's technically on the other side of the law and everything. But she has a purpose, and they're able to sort of work with her. So she's a bad character, but she can actually help the group in some way here. So no, I think the story was pretty cool. I mean, anyone who remembers the original series will remember how Genomite sort of works there. So it's nice to see how it's done here in comic illustrated form. So no, I think it's definitely definitely serves its purpose here, and the fact that it's part of the gang and it has some history behind it, I think is a nice touch.
So Jargala guides them through some of the kind of underground passages which are as old as the city itself, and Mako points out that the only building large enough to house a couple of stolen airships is the abandoned earth and fire refinery. Tokuga has to be there. and they basically are just about to enter where he is. So this might be the first time they've like officially sort of connected the dots properly between like Republic City and the stuff set up from the comics and so on. So that Earth and Fire Refinery, we saw that place in the Rift, and I think we're roughly going back to it in Imbalance, is directly part of Republic City. That factory is in there. Probably slightly different and changed, but just to find out that like it's actually been abandoned in all this time, and especially knowing that that's like Toph's father's company, like what happened there? Like how long has it been like abandoned? Is it just since all of the craziness over the course of the series, like the different problems that have happened in the series, that it happens to be in like the wrong place, or has it been down for a while and that's something we might actually see in the comics? Either way, I think cool reference. I appreciate the kind of connection between both sets of comics. But what were your thoughts on this reference?
Yeah, no, I think the reference was definitely pretty cool. Just the fact that we pretty much assumed that that's the location, but the fact that we get a direct link here, and it's not really that sort of like putting the focus here is just sort of like an off comment that Mako makes here. But definitely works for setting up the scene here. But no, I think it's cool. It's the fact that they're able to sort of get to it from underground. So there's some history behind the building and sort of the city. So there's probably more to it than that. Maybe we'll learn, maybe we won't learn in the future.
We cut back into the factory, basically the abandoned factory. Asami's finishing up on the gas kind of dispersion chamber thing, and Tokuga basically is just like, because power is never granted to those who ask, it must be taken. As suddenly Mako jumps in, Jargala, Bolin is using some lava bending there, Korra's present, and they just kind of rush in and immediately start to take people out. It seems like Jargala is just able to like bend like creeping crystal whenever she wants. I guess she brought some with her, but it's like she can turn the ground into it, or just that she can like manipulate it to make it creep along the ground. Either way, a cool, slightly different style for her. And Tokuga is just like, get the airship in the air. He takes Wonyong, Kum, and Asami off with him, and Jargala gets a brief shot in at Tokuga, throws some creeping crystal at him. He catches it. It begins to, trap his arm, but he just uses his kind of spirit tentacle to smash the creeping crystal, and then kind of tosses Jargala away. And I think that's like the last we see of her in the book, as he just hops onto the airship which is taking off and kind of hooks onto it with his hook sword, and he's temporarily escaped for now, basically. But what are your thoughts on this kind of action scene here?
Yeah, no, it's a nice sort of quick action scene. It's not overly too much to it here, but you get to see, I guess, our main cast of heroes in action here. Fortunately, they're not actually able to sort of save, Asami and Kum at this point here, but it's a nice bit to see, I guess, sort of how the creeping crystal works on him here, and just the fact that he's able to sort of get out of it. I mean, it definitely seems like him being half spirit, as we see, later on, just has, even if it does make him disfigured, it definitely has a lot of advantages as well. So I don't know, it's just interesting to see how he's able to use that in this sort of fight here, where he might have normally been sort of outmatched in this sort of situation here. But no, it's definitely a cool, quick sort of fight scene that they have here.
So Jargala actually tells Korra, Mako, and Bolin to go off. She and the rest of the creeping crystals will actually hold off the other uh, triple threats and try and take back the turf. Mako and Bolin get on a motorbike as Korra just goes on a kind of giant air scooter, and they say they're going to take Kyoshi Bridge, and she has a hunch that he's heading back basically towards the portal because the airship is heading right in that direction, which it turns out he kind of is. He says, circle the portal and wait for my orders to release the gas. And, you know, Asami points out that, you know, the portal is surrounded by a lot of people because of the protests. Raiko's there, all the people who kind of Zhu Li brought in. It's going to be really bad because everyone's bunched up around the portal. So, you know, Wonyong, Kum, and Asami kind of, you know, they kind of have a look and they like realize they have to do something between each other. But what are your thoughts on these couple of pages, I suppose, getting into position for the final stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a nice sort of setup here, just the fact that they're showing, you know, I guess sort of what could be, you know, a really sort of bad situation depending on how things sort of play out here, and the fact that, you know, Asami seems to be working, you know, now together with him sort of to figure out sort of what they can do. So I don't know. I think it's nice to see how they're planning or just setting up the stage here for what happens in the next couple of pages.
Yeah. Like the end of the scene is just them kind of pointing out that, you know, Wanyong Kum get the gas mask, and we also see that there's kind of like a safety axe there beside it as well, and both of those things kind of come in important by the end of the book. So we cut back to the portal. Varric is there kind of talking into the camera, and he wants a low angle shot of Zhu Li, make her look heroic, bring peace to the portal. Everyone's still chanting it, and Varric notices that the airship above them is not United Forces, and this is where Tokuga gives his threat to the whole city. He says, soon to be leader of Republic City. Milo says, is that guy running for president too? And they're like, nope. He says, President Raiko and Avatar Korra have failed this city. The spirit portal stands not as the symbol of hope, but as the harbinger of destruction. And that's why I'm stepping in. I'll make sure this once great metropolis rises again and becomes the most dominant power in the world. Starting immediately, the president and the Avatar will answer to me. And Raiko's like, who does that hoodlum think he is? He has no idea what it means to lead a city. And the campaign manager, of course, sees the kind of publicity side of all of this. No, but he does have a way with words. You should steal that metropolis line for your next speech, sir. And he says, Tokuga says, my first order for President Raiko is to immediately and permanently withdraw the United Forces from Republic City. Should the president refuse to comply, he should know that I've equipped this airship with poison gas and won't hesitate to use it. Panic, everyone begins to panic. Tenzin red is the airbender because they're perfect to defend against gas, and that's kind of the setup before we cut back up to the airship. So what are your thoughts on Tokuga's threat to the city here?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, with everything that sort of has happened, you can see why his, you know, specific, I guess, point of view of just the spirit portal being, you know, basically the bad omen that's sort of setting everything down. But I don't know, it definitely seems, I don't know, his idea of using the gas, I mean, I guess in this sort of situation is pretty threatening because, you know, there's all these people here. But if there wasn't as many people here, it'd be interesting to see sort of what his real sort of, I guess, plan would have been, because I mean the whole area is pretty much, you know, quarantined off at this area. So unless he's just sort of setting it up because, you know, the dispersal of it can go, you know, I guess over the whole city or whatever, which, you know, probably would regardless. You know, I don't know, it's interesting just to see what his plan would have been otherwise. But, you know, the fact that there are people here and those, you know, immediately cause a panic is pretty, it makes it pretty serious. And the fact that he's just willing to use this poison gas.
Yeah, like I suppose for me, like it's a good thread. I think the plan is all right. Like the whole motivation setup for Tokuga as like a villain has never been particularly great because like he's blaming Korra for like what happened to him when like it was completely his fault. He was the one who attacked the portal and was like aggressive towards the spirit, and he got hit. That's what happened. He should be angry at the spirit, not Korra. So just that kind of disconnect between like what the book is trying to say and me like just not understanding how even the character could feel that way when clearly Korra, like they so obviously showed that as the spirit was coming towards Tokuga, Korra wasn't really focused on what that spirit was doing. It's not like she could control it or anything like that. So it's just little things like that that, like, I don't think Tokuga is a particularly great character. He just happens to create like a decent threat for the finale kind of to take place here. But yeah, we see quick cut to Asami kind of breaking some of the wires in the airship, and then we cut back down to Iroh asking Raiko for more orders, and he decides that, I backed down against Kuvira and I'm still paying the price. I'm not about to make the same mistake again. I want you to call in a squadron of airplanes, force Tokuga's airship out over the bay, then take it down. And Iroh's just like, what about Asami and Wonyong if we attack the ship? And Raiko's just like, you're questioning in direct order. And he's like, no, I'll radio the airfield. But he does immediately go over to warn, give some warning to Tenzin about what's about to happen here. As Zhu Li is already preparing the evacuation away from the portal. And he just tells him, you need to know Raiko ordered me to bring down the ship. Airplanes are on the way. I'd say you have about 5 minutes to get up there and get her out of harm's way. And yeah, so that's, I suppose, Iroh's kind of going a little bit behind Raiko's back, just flat out disagreeing with him on something for once, but still having to follow the orders, but giving them a warning. I thought they actually did kind of Iroh's kind of reluctance with Raiko fairly well, because I've always wanted like there to be a little bit more on Iroh as a character, especially because he's like the kind of prince of the Fire Nation, though I think we assume that the Azumi's daughter is more the crown princess, given that Iroh's like a military man. But like to see him kind of stand up more, given that he theoretically could be the Fire Lord at some point, depending on how things go. But what were your thoughts on this, Raiko's last bad decision here, pretty much?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's just Raiko. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess he's looking at, I guess, sort of the bigger picture here versus the poison gas versus the people that are on the plane. I mean, I guess you could say that, but it still just seems like a pretty bad decision. I mean, the fact that he's not even, it doesn't seem like he's attempting to sort of really think of another option in this sort of situation here. Just I don't know, it just seems like he's not doing it exactly for sort of the best ways, or at least he's not, I don't know, it doesn't seem like he's considering at least all of his options that he could possibly do here with, the resources that he has on hand, specifically, having the Avatar here and all the airbenders. You would think that, I don't know, maybe he could think of some other way, or at least consider, the other people that are here, like Zhu Li is, as far as, getting the safety here. But no, it's nice to see Iroh, the sort of, I mean, he's still called the forces, so it's not like he's really sort of completely going behind the back of the president here. But, he's telling, Korra and everyone sort of what's going on here, to at least give them the chance to save the people. So I think it's a nice way that, you can see him, even if he is going along with the orders, he still wants to sort of do the right thing, which is a lot more than Raiko.
Mm-hmm. And after this, basically, Korra and Asami both kind of jump into action, and Korra grabs Ugi after asking Tenzin if she could use him. He does, but he's kind of like, be careful. When am I not ever careful? And he's like, Then Asami activates her plan. She pulls out a bunch of wires, which activates the gas inside the ship, and everyone starts panicking here. Asami like judo flips a guy into another guy, as everyone begins to sort of cough as the gas comes in. Wonyong cracks open the gas masks, and he and Asami put them on, and it seems like, oh, she completely has this sorted, but they haven't planned for the fact that Tokuga, being half spirit now, basically makes him immune to the gas, and he just rips off Asami's gas mask. Which I suppose we'll briefly pause there. I'm still a bit confused about the whole half spirit, half human thing. I don't think they've explained it all that well, especially phrasing it that way, where like they haven't been particularly clear on the exact details of this, because the obvious comparison is like the Avatar is basically half human, half spirit, because it's like it's 2 in 1, but it makes the overall being half human, half spirit, because it makes sense. And the idea is that Korra has more power because she has Rava inside her and can use some of that spirit power, whereas all that's happened in his case has been that Dragon Eel spirit passed through him once and like physically altered him, and now he's considered half spirit and has all this crazy other powers. Uh, that I don't really like buy into all that much, and that I'd understand it a bit more if it was just that there are some kind of physical changes to him, but he seems to have some sort of sense of control over or ability to change spirits into dark. He he seems much more powerful using the spirit aspects of himself, and then the idea here that like his lungs work differently now as well just feels a little odd as such without going into a lot of the details. I'm not like too annoyed about it or anything like that, but it's just it feels a little too vague about like they can just have Tokuga do anything that he wants. I suppose I'll talk more about criticisms about how they do the Tokuga Korra fight later on, but for now it's just a little bit like, okay, I'll buy that for now, but you know, please explain this to me more. But what are your thoughts on this little sequence here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It definitely seems odd just from the fact that we just don't know how much of his changes actually have happened to him. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's sort of one of those things where even he doesn't know sort of like what has actually changed to him. I mean, we know he's mentioned like he has a clearer mind now, so apparently he's smarter or at least can, use more of his normal intellect. I mean, he has, the physical aspects that we can all see here. So, I mean, I don't know, in some part, I mean, it makes sense that he would physically be changed somehow, even if it was like only like a brief section that he sort of had. I mean, it almost seems like, being hit with like the spirit seems to always, work out more positive for you, minus the sort of, physical aspects of you just being sort of disfigured here. But I don't know. It definitely seems like it's a odd situation where he just sort of, has these abilities that we just, he and we as, I guess, sort of the viewer just don't know about yet. So, I don't know, it definitely seems kind of odd here. I mean, at some points it doesn't bother me too much. I mean, I don't know. It seems because his powers is, as a spirit is almost, it's always sort of activated versus, Korra's, she usually has to sort of, bring it forth to light, at least for the more sort of like enhanced abilities other than being able to bend all the elements. So I don't know. It's interesting to sort of compare the two versus one being sort of like integrated via past lives versus one sort of being just like temporary integrated. So I don't know. There's definitely a lot more that they could go in detail there if they really sort of wanted to. And I don't know, maybe since he is still around at the end of this book, we'll find out more about that. But it definitely doesn't seem like that would be a focus point that they would ever really have unless he really became a important character to us.
Mm-hmm. Korra jumps off Oogie, enters the airship, temporarily sends Tokuga flying with some airbending, and then helps Asami with making an air bubble around herself and Asami. Asami goes to fly the airship. After a little bit of a disagreement here, Korra initially says, "I'll try to land the ship," and then Asami's like, "No, I've seen you drive. You keep Tokuga busy. I'll steer the airship." And Korra's like, "Yeah, that sounds right." Tokuga then breaks open the windows, which effectively releases the gas out into the world, but also means that I suppose they don't need to worry as much about it on the airship, so they can sort of fight without needing to have a bubble around them the whole time. And Asami decides that, okay, if Tokuga's immune to the gas, that means it won't hurt the spirits, so we'll go into the spirit world. So they head into the portal here to stop the gas from doing any more damage, and Tenzin on the ground basically is going to help with the airbenders deal with the gas that's still in the physical world here. So yeah, they're setting up, like, I suppose the finale here. They're heading into the portal, and there's going to be some chaos on the outside with just a manageable amount of the gas, but still a threat. But what are your thoughts on these couple of pages?
Yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, it's cool just to see, Korra sort of in action here, using the air bubbles here in a more positive way than we've seen him use before. And, I guess, I don't see the beginning of this whole sort of confrontation that they have here, and, sort of the quick thinking that I guess we sort of, always expect from Asami to sort of have in these sort of situations, definitely works out for her advantage here, and just going into the portal, which I think it's a nice setup, which is what they're trying to do here.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, after that, the fight basically, this is the Korra versus Tokuga fight. she does an airbending kick, smashes him against the window here, and basically she thinks she sort of has him finished. He kind of powers up, kind of snaps his arm out of this metal it was trapped in. He like dodges her attack and then just basically like wins the fight by like chi blocking her like twice in her arms, and then it seems like Korra's just out until Asami like steers the airship in a kind of crazy way to kind of fix things. And this kind of sends kind of Tokuga flying out one of the windows he just cracked. He's holding on by his tentacle, but then Wonyong comes over, uses the axe which was set up earlier on, and just kind of slices it. So I think this is one of the more inconsistent things of just like his tentacle is like the most powerful thing in the world, basically. Like this tentacle defeats the Avatar, but is chopped off by like a businessman with an axe. It's like, what? I get like it's not like immune to everything, but like the fact that he beats Korra in like 2 moves, and it makes Korra look terrible in this fight, without really making Tokuga look all that powerful. It just makes Korra look weak, is at least my interpretation of this. And then it being Wonyong and Asami to basically be the ones to quote unquote defeat Tokuga here, just feels a bit weak for my liking. But what were your thoughts on this fight?
I don't know. It's definitely one that you wouldn't expect. I mean, you would think that it would be. I don't know. You'd think you definitely would be. I guess more one-sided on Korra's side. I mean, I guess I guess the idea that they're sort of trying to go for here is just sort of the speed of the tentacle, which I guess is something that we've sort of seen before. That it is, pretty quick, and I guess that sort of makes sense just from sort of the creature that it comes from here is just sort of got the drop on Korra here. I mean, it definitely seems like, I mean, we've seen chi blocking used before, and it definitely does sort of affect I guess different benders in different ways. Sometimes it almost incapacitates them, sometimes it doesn't do that much at all. I don't know, it's kind of weird how chi blocking can and cannot work sometimes, because it definitely seems like it could be like almost like a one-hit KO type thing, versus just sort of it just puts them sort of like they're bending out of commission, but they're still physically able to do things. I don't know. It definitely seems to affect people in different ways. I guess maybe it's just a bit stronger here because he has the spirit tentacle to go with it here. But I don't know. It definitely seems odd that I guess I guess you wouldn't expect it to be the strongest thing, so yeah, maybe an axe can do it, but I don't know, maybe they were just trying to sort of give Kun some redemption here, some a bit more redemption here, as we see them try to do later on as well here. So maybe that's why they gave him sort of the last little, I guess, sort of ploy here. Which, I mean, we know he's not really sort of like defeated by the end of this. They just sort of got him away. So I mean, it's not like they really defeated him, but it definitely is an interesting one where they definitely make Korra not to seem to be as sort of strong as we've led her to be up until this point.
Yeah, like I assume if Asami didn't do that, Avatar State would have activated and that would have ended things, but they didn't want to do Avatar State. At least I'm assuming that would have happened. I'm assuming the Avatar State can still activate past like some basic chi blocking. Like unless you just completely chi block everyone completely, you'd still be able to Avatar State out of that. But yeah, we get some quick panels. Mako tells Bolin to go and help Korra and Asami with the airship kind of crashing, and he'll deal with Tokuga, who's sort of falling out of the airship. Bolin randomly mentions he has new boots. I don't know if that was like a thing that was mentioned before, but he does. He has new shoes, apparently. Raiko's in a kind of jeep-like thing with his campaign manager, fleeing from the gas and stuff like that. Zhu Li's helping people get out, being filmed doing this, as it's more or less implied that Raiko's being filmed escaping as well. A little girl kind of gets caught in the vines, and Zhu Li rushes down to help her despite the gas coming in, and manages to save this little girl in front of everyone, hands her back to her mother, and Varric kind of hugs her. This is all filmed. Varric's like, please tell me you got that all in camera, and the cameraman says that he did, and he also reveals, yeah, I got footage of Raiko hightailing it out of here like a coward. And we see the airbenders in actually a really cool kind of thing. They're guiding the gas away in this kind of cool ball and chain like kind of thing, and it looks like everything's basically resolved at the portal for the most part here. So this is basically meant to be the resolution of like, yeah, Raiko's not coming back from this. He's fleeing right as everything. He's fleeing on his own basically as everyone's in trouble. Zhu Li is the hero again. So what were your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, this definitely works very well in Zhu Li's favor here. Just her sort of, taking action and sort of jumping in to sort of help people in the time of need here. And yeah, it's definitely a nice sort of frame that they have there with all the airbenders sort of bending sort of the poison gas away with the air bison, and you even get to see, I guess, the airships that were coming, but now it's too late for them to sort of do anything in this sort of situation here. So it's definitely an interesting way of sort of setting up sort of the rise of Zhu Li here.
Mm-hmm. So, next what we have is Bolin arrives at the crashed airship in the spirit world. Wonyong Kum's alright, the thugs are sort of injured, but Korra can heal them. It doesn't seem to be that bad. Korra and Asami, I suppose, properly reunite, properly have a talk here on the ground. And he, basically Korra says, you were right about what, as long as we're together we can overcome everything. They hug. Bolin comes in. The spirits also arrive at this point in time, and here's where we get our resolution to this plot point, at least for now. The dragon eel spirit is a dark spirit at this point and says, haven't you brought enough turmoil to our world, Avatar? And she says, I promise we're not here to cause any trouble. And he says, as long as the portal remains open, there will be strife between humans and spirits. And she says, it doesn't have to be that way. If we work together, we can find peace. And he says, how can there be balance with men like him, or when men like him are determined to exploit our world? And I don't know about the writing on this. It seems weird. Like Korra just immediately is like, oh, maybe you're right. Keeping the northern spirits portals open was one thing, but this one was never meant to exist. And Asami says, no, you can't close it, it's too precious. Wonyong Kum agrees, and he says that, what if I abandoned my claim on the land around the portal? And the spirit asks him, why would you do that? And he says, because he owes these two women his life, and that the last thing he wants is to cause more hostility in Republic City. I'd rather do what I can to support the Avatar in bringing peace. And then the dragon eel spirit says, if what you say is true, as he reverts to being a light spirit again, then I'm willing to let this matter lie and allow the future to unfold. But we'll be watching what happens next, Avatar, and for your sake I hope the situation improves, otherwise you'll be seeing us again soon. And that's what they do with the spirit-human conflict for now. Wonyong Kum saves the day by giving up the land that he only kind of had really at the start of this book. And in my mind, like, the story is just kind of reset back to default, basically back to where it was prior to this book. And the only thing they've resolved is the little plot of turf wars and there being like conflict around the portal. Nothing about the actual relationship between humans and spirits, really. And the fact that the spirit is basically like, you do one more thing wrong and we're coming for you again. It's just like, no discussion. And the fact that Korra felt oddly like weak-willed with how she like dealt with this situation as well. Especially when like the dragon eel spirit's point was that like someone as evil as Wonyong Kum, and it's like, really? Like, he's the guy you have that big of a problem with? This isn't particularly well done. I feel like, does Mike know like the scope of what we're dealing with here? Like, the same guy who wrote Beginnings and like the origin of the human spirit conflict and how like far back it goes and how much there is to it. And he's made it such a small thing here with this dragon eel spirit being like the main guy. I hope they improve upon this. I hope they decide at some point to actually commit to telling a good story with this, because I get that this is fine to sort of, as I said, put it back to sort of neutral, but there's no substance really to what happens here. It just is resetting it back to normal. But what are your thoughts on how they resolve it for Turf Wars, at least?
I mean, for Turf Wars, is fine. It is, like you said, it is just sort of a reset back to the way that they were. And I don't know, the spirit definitely, I don't know, I guess from his point of view, I guess it makes sense that, Wong would be sort of, I guess, the evil guy in the situation where, in the grand scheme of things, he's really not that evil overall. Like, I mean, he's a shady businessman, but he's not really like, he's not like going to try to, drop poison gas or anything like that. We've seen, I guess, sort of his, sense of morality and where that sort of lies here. So, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that bad. But yeah, no, this definitely seems like it's the sort of thing that's just sort of the beginning of sort of setting up sort of a larger, sort of, I guess, issue that has to be resolved later on, which I don't know, I guess, the fact that there are sort of, donating this sort of area and sort of what they're going to try to do within the future, maybe, there can be sort of more talks to it. I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just his spirit in particular. He's just sort of, I don't know, maybe he's just off-putting or something like that, but it definitely seems like there's more to this than sort of they're leading us to believe at this point in time. And I don't know, the fact that we get to see sort of other sort of elements that are going to be lying in the wait, maybe that'll actually force things to the surface sooner rather than later.
Yeah, because like I'm borderline waiting for like a Wan Shi Tong, Carrot Guy to just come in, like slap the dragon eel in spirit and be like, "Why are you talking for the whole like race of spirits?" and just have him go off. But I think the biggest problem that I have with this is the sort of like inconsistent writing about this, in that they made it a theme of the book that like the dragon eel spirit in one of the previous parts made this whole point of like him saying to Korra, your actions have consequences and stuff like that. It kind of being a case with Tokuga as well, but the dragon eel spirit is kind of like responsible for all of this when you really break it down. Like Tokuga does all of this from like part 2 onwards because the dragon eel spirit transformed him, and like basically the dragon eel spirit got Korra in trouble for something that the dragon eel spirit did, and then he's trying to explain it that like, oh no, it's all your problems, when I was just waiting for like Korra basically to just scream at the guy, stop spirit transforming people and none of this will happen. Which is basically exactly like the problem back in like beginnings, where like humans were unsafe in these spirit wilds because outside of the line turtles, because basically spirits would spirit transform them, and that's why bending had to become a thing. So I don't know, I think they really have to kind of go through the history of this to really kind of create a better thing going forward, and I suppose just present things more equally, in that I'm not sure if it's just Mike writing these characters in a specific way, but it feels the entire time like almost Mike's perspective, the spirits haven't done anything wrong and it's all humans and stuff like that, when I think it's much more even than they're sort of presenting it. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you notice that he's sort of writing it in a way where it makes humans be like the ones very much at fault, and it's kind of giving spirits an out because the humans always have to respect the spirits, but it never ever be brought up that like there needs to be respect the other way around as well?
Yeah, no, it definitely. I mean, just in the way that they're sort of, phrasing the sort of conversations here, it always seems like, the humans in these sort of conversations, specifically Core, is more sort of on the defensive end of things. They're definitely, I don't know, I guess I don't know, they're really showing, I guess, or just the way that they're setting it up, they're really showing the hierarchy of things, of just sort of the spirits being, the ancient ones being the ones that, have always sort of been, I guess, in the past, sort of respected and have most of the power, just sort of always being looked up to by humans and not really showing that there is any middle ground, which maybe that's just the way that, they're trying to just show it in general, just that, the humans in this sort of situation will always be sort of on the second place of things, and there is no way of doing any middle ground. I don't know, that seems kind of contrary to the way just the world in general is sort of trying to work, as far as having the balance in almost all sort of things. So it seems kind of counterpoint to sort of the main sort of theme of Avatar sort of in general. But as far as they've shown us so far, it definitely seems like they're sort of above, which I don't know, I guess that was sort of, almost the whole point of the Avatar to begin with, to show that there can be some sort of balance with humans and spirits.
Yeah, and it's weird because especially with the comics, like I get it, different writers, but like Mike assisted on the Avatar comics, but if you look at Gene Yang's stuff from especially the Search and the Rift, they made it more understandable from the spirit's perspective of like making them make mistakes, like have just as many problems as humans with like the Mother of Faces and her poor relationship with Ko, and then especially the Rift with the whole like Lady Tianhai really like understanding humans and going into like the what is inherently different between humans and spirits, and her actually wanting to become a human, and Old Iron not actually General Old Iron not being willing to give humans a chance, and just how he couldn't change yet Tianhai was able to like immediately change. I kind of want some of that nuance to come back like we have before, but this page isn't done yet. We get some, I suppose, resolution between Wonyong Kum and Asami. She says, I guess I had you pegged wrong, I'm sorry. And he says, I hope this means our companies can do business in the future. And she's just like, don't get ahead of yourself, but we'll see. And then Mako turns up and says that he has no sign of where Tokuga actually is. And Korra says, I bet he'll lay low for a while, but I doubt we've seen the last of him. So I don't know, was anyone asking for Tokuga to come back? Like, I don't find him particularly interesting. I would like to know more about him, but this was the book to kind of tell us that stuff. You didn't really establish a good origin story for him to set up him appearing in these books, and I don't think they did a great job at explaining his transition into being half human, half spirit, so I suppose, like, unfinished business and all that, but I'm not overly excited to see more of him. But what are your thoughts on this kind of resolution page here on some of the plots?
I mean, I don't know for Tortuga. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if he's sort of the catalyst for the sort of spirit human sort of issues that we've been dealing with. Then maybe there might be, an interesting sort of way of having him come back into the story. But him as sort of like a standalone sort of character that was, sort of a villain before. I mean, that part of him definitely isn't sort of as interesting. So I don't know. It'd be interesting to see how they use him later on. But the sort of other resolutions, I think, they're okay. They just leave the possibility for things to happen in the future.
Then we cut to 3 weeks later, and Shiro Shinobi is announcing election night in Republic City, and he says he's live from the fabulous Four Elements Hotel ballroom, and he says everyone who's anyone has come here tonight in support of Zhu Li Moon, hoping to see her become the next president of the United Republic. Raiko's hasty retreat during the crisis at the portal has left many voters scratching their heads. Varric saying he was out of here faster than an eel hound being chased by a swarm of scorpion bees. Many folks have praised Zhu Li's selfless heroics that day, and says she's exactly the kind of leader United Republic needs, but did her actions do enough to change the voters' minds? We'll see soon enough. Then we get an interesting scene of Mako and Bolin, something that I suppose we kind of predicted this in a way, almost. Not quite that they commit to it, but that something kind of needed to be done with Bolin. I definitely remember us talking about this before the book came out. And Bolin says to Mako, oh, Beifong didn't tell you? Don't take this too hard, but now that the triad situation is under control, I've decided to move on. I'm quitting the force. And Mako's like, oh, I thought you loved being a cop. And Bolin says, yes, it was thrilling while it lasted, but I can't be tied down. This little bird needs to fly. And Mako's just like, okay, whatever. But Bolin goes on. Brave, brave Mako, please don't make this any harder than it needs to be. What we had was a special partnership, but I'm afraid it's time to go our separate ways. And Mako says, but I'm going to see you at home in like 2 hours. And he goes off saying, I'll give you time to process all of this. So, very interesting stuff there to just see them committing to making Bolin a police officer in this book, but then moving him on. I completely agree with this. I think this was something that was needed. This is Mako's thing. I think bringing Bolin into it was fine for a while Mako's injured. But to keep him there, I think, would detract from Mako's kind of arc and story, what his role is. And I don't think it's necessarily exactly what Bolin needs to do. It does put Bolin once again in this situation of, like, what do we do with him? Because, like, I keep coming back and just saying the fact that, like, he's a lava bender. He's, like, one of the most powerful benders in the world at this point in time. Like, he's up there with in terms of active benders just because he's a lava bender. and he has no direction seemingly. So interesting, but I actually like this decision that they could see that this wasn't something that they could really keep together for the whole time. But what are your thoughts on this, the breaking up of the cop partnership here?
Yeah, no, I mean, it doesn't really surprise me. I mean, Bolin's always sort of been one of those characters that, sort of, does something, he gets really into it, and then he sort of jumps ship and, is on to sort of the next thing, whatever it is. So, I mean, he's still a young character. Most of them are, all of them are young characters. So he's still sort of trying to find his way in the world and sort of see what really works for him. I mean, it seems like all of the things that he's sort of been, into have, linked together in some form or fashion, either with his bending or just sort of his natural sort of talents that he sort of finds out that he has. So I think this is definitely sort of a good thing here, and they make sort of a light joke about it, of him being sort of like overly dramatic, which he usually is about most things regardless.
Yeah, as for where they go with him, I don't know, my speculation, I suppose, after book 4, before we knew where they were going in Turf Wars, was always that like his strengths really come down to the fact that like he's really good with people, and then especially in book 4, what he really liked as part of the Earth Empire was like helping people, like the kind of humanitarian aid, like that, almost like starting a charity or like working for a charity in some sort of role like that, helping people is where kind of he should be. How exactly that comes about, I'm not exactly sure. Maybe with Zhu Li as president, there's some role for him in some sort of capacity like that, especially with like Varric being close to, like, married to Zhu Li, and them being like best friends in a way. Something along those lines, but I'm not overly sure. But did you have any speculation on where Bolin might go next?
Yeah, no, I think something in humanities would definitely be up his alley, and with, I don't know, with all of the reconstruction that has to go on in Republic City, I definitely could see him taking some role in that way, just with his bending and just sort of his natural sort of abilities. I mean, I think we've seen him work, pretty well in sort of like organized fashion, where he does, have someone, directing him towards some route. Like he definitely doesn't seem like he's the type of character that will go out and sort of organize something on his own, but as part of a group, he definitely is a solid person to have behind you, who can lead things if he really has to, but works well where he has some sort of direction from someone. So I definitely could see him working to sort of just help Republic City in some way in the future, for sure.
Then we cut over to Korra talking to her father, Tonrock. He says, so where's Asami? How are you two doing? And Korra says, I thought you didn't want to talk about my personal life. And he says, about what I said when you and Asami came to visit. And she says, it's all right, Dad. I know the Water Tribe has its customs. And he says, yes, but I don't want them to dictate how I talk to my own daughter. I don't need to tell you our traditions can be a bit emotionally stifling. And she says, yes, I'm beginning to realize that. I find this to be a little bit of a kind of puzzling scene. Like, I get she was upset back in part 1 after they went to visit Senna and Tonrock. I always interpreted that, especially with like Asami's reaction to when Korra sort of got upset about it afterwards, that like Korra overreacted to that, because Asami sort of leaned more towards being like, that's actually good advice to more keep the relationship private and not be like super crazy open about it, because they always, like, in part 1 they basically set up like Korra wanted to like borderline like scream from the rooftops about their relationship, and her family were more like, just be a little careful about who you tell, not telling them to hide it, which seems like the way Korra's sort of taking it here. So the little bit of attitude here, I think, is a little bit like not exactly needed, especially when no one in the entire book had any issue with their relationship. It just feels a little weird to sort of come back to this right at the end. But what were your thoughts on this?
I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, the attitude part, I guess that's sort of, I don't know, that always seems to be sort of innate in Korra's sort of character, maybe to a lesser degree as she sort of has matured sort of over time here. But I don't know, I think it's interesting that they do, at least have this sort of talk here to at least sort of discuss, sort of what has happened in the past here, and just sort of, how they both have had to deal with traditions not necessarily helping either one of them out in sort of the best sort of situations here. So I do like that they're at least able to sort of realize that sort of situation and come to some better resolution by the end of this.
Yeah, like they do hug here at the end. I want you to know you and Asami have my support no matter what. But that was got across in the previous scene, back in book one. Like, both Senna and Tonrock were actually happy for their relationship. But anyway, Asami comes over. They say they're about to make the announcement, and Shiro Shinobi says, and with a whopping 68% of the vote, Zhu Li Moon wins in a landslide. There's congratulations all around. Behind the curtain, Varric congratulates his wife and says, I can't believe this is actually happening. And Varric says, I assure you, it's all very real and it's tremendous. And she comes out to give her speech, as Varric says, now get out there and do the thing. And she gives her speech. She says, I stand before you humbled and honoured to serve as your next president, with no illusions about the challenges we face. If the events for the past several months are any indication, there are still dark times ahead, and our path is far from certain. Our republic and this city are unique in the world. There's no place else where there's so many disparate groups of and traditions have come together to live as one, but Republic City is only in its infancy, and too often our differences become a source of conflict, but it doesn't have to be that way. Next time when you're walking down the street, look up and say hello to that stranger passing you by. Imagine what it's like to walk in their shoes. If enough of us do that, we might someday find balance as a society and with one another. But I realized that peace and harmony won't happen overnight. After all, the Avatar has been trying to achieve balance for millennia, and there's still much work to be done. It will take all of us supporting one another to fight the forces of hate that seek to throw our lives into chaos. I know the portal has caused a lot of problems, and I will work tirelessly to rebuild and help the evacuees find new homes. A new spear portal in the middle of downtown is not something any of us could have anticipated, but it's here to stay. And now that Wonyong has generously donated his land to our city, we need to plan for the portal's future. And that is why, as my first act as president, I will bestow the spear portal and the surrounding wilds to the Air Nation. So I think we'll take a pause there to just discuss the first part of it. I think it's a nice speech. It sort of in a way references some of the kind of end of book speeches that Korra has given in the past, and that Zhu Li seems to be more on board with the sort of stuff that Korra was saying, whereas Raiko clearly wasn't. And I think the big takeaway here is that, okay, it's going to be a plot point in the background consistently, the rebuilding of the city after everything that's happened. Plus, the big thing here, Wonyong Kum's handed over the city, she hands it over to the Air Nation. So the Air Nation have technical control over that section, so they now have obviously Air Temple Island plus that little area around the spear portal, and they're basically allowed to kind of do what they want with it. And I suppose this basically means it will be made into some sort of a kind of heritage park type thing where it's open, but it's more of like open if you're willing to like respect what you're going into type thing. But what are your thoughts on the first part of Julie's speech?
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely pretty good. I mean, I think, Avatar, in general does a really good job of, these sort of, I guess, ending sort of book or story sort of speeches here. And, Zuli's is pretty good here. And the fact that, she does, at least she's aware of, sort of the issues and the turmoil that has happened. And, it doesn't seem like she believes that there will be sort of quick fix in this sort of situation. There's no sort of, way to change the narrative really quickly here, as they do show, one panel of Raiko looking out onto the city here. So I don't know, I think it's definitely a nice way to sort of set up, the future of the city, and just the way that they go about illustrating it through the couple panels here. I think definitely, shows, it gets across the idea of what she's trying to speak to the people here.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, as you say, there's that panel of Raiko looking out at the city. I'm not really sure what to make of, like, if we're gonna see Raiko again, if he's now going to be this just no longer president but still a politician who's gonna be like the one against her the whole time, or if he's just gonna fade into the background and borderline we won't see him again. I'd prefer them to not go overly political on this. Like, I feel like, okay, we have Zhu Li as president. She'll have her own struggles, I assume. Let's move on from that. Like, it's an interesting enough plot, but there's so much more interesting stuff to deal with in this universe than just these political squabbles of now Raiko tried to like defame Zhu Li as president and all that sort of stuff. But what do you think? Do you think we'll see Raiko again, or what?
I mean, I don't know. We haven't seen. I mean, at least when Raiko was in presidency, we didn't see as much sort of, I guess, sort of direct sort of opposition to what he was doing as far as like his cabinet and his his sort of people that he's sort of working with. So I wouldn't sort of expect as much here. And I don't know. Maybe maybe Raiko can sort of learn situation here where he definitely wasn't exactly in the right for pretty much any of these situations here. So I don't know. It seems like there would be enough other issues that they wouldn't have to make the whole thing over the political cold. Now that there is one specific person in power here, it would just be the struggles that Zhu Li has to go with holding up to everything that she has sort of agreed to at this point.
Mm-hmm. And Zhu Li ends her speech with saying, I'd like to leave you with some wise words from Avatar Aang. And we get, the true mind can weather all lies and illusion without being lost. The true heart can tough the poison of hatred without being harmed. Though darkness thrives in the void, it always yields to purifying light. Obviously, but we'll actually tackle the last scene in just a second. But that was interesting to end on that quote. Like, obviously, I suppose it's gone down as history that it's an Aang quote, even though like it was obviously the Lion Turtle who said that to Aang. So just like, when did Aang say that to someone else is I suppose an interesting question. And does it really fit exactly as what they're going for here? I get they wanted to do the whole, light always kind of thrives with the whole like the current spirit portal is the one that like seems to emanate the most light, and it's a nice line to end on. Perhaps a little bit much, not the most kind of like bit thrown in, but it's a nice quote. I always like that quote from the Lion Turtle, and using it here is fine. I just don't know how fitting it actually is. But what are your thoughts on this quote being used right at the end?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It definitely makes it seem. I don't know. I mean, I guess it was a pretty sort of dire situation. I don't know. I guess maybe it seemed more. I don't know, more serious, more epic, more whatever. When it's been used before with sort of almost sort of like the world coming to an end basically versus here. So I don't know. Maybe there's that sort of comparison, which is why it doesn't seem like it might fit sort of as well as it could. But I think it definitely is a nice line to have here, and the fact that it is said by a previous sort of avatar, regardless of the origins of the actual sort of quote. I think that it definitely speaks to sort of how people are feeling in this sort of situation, and just sort of all the possible sort of turmoil and the tribulations that they have to go through, or even still. So I think in that sense it does sort of work.
Mm-hmm. And then while this is being said, Korra goes over to Asami and leads her out the kind of back onto the balcony, and says, I've been afraid to say something, but I can't keep it to myself any longer." There's a bit of a pause, a trail off, and Korra says, "I love you, Asami," and then Asami says, "I love you too," and the book just ends on them kind of hugging each other. Not a kiss, but obviously very kind of close kind of interaction here at the end. I actually was a bit surprised they didn't end it on a kiss, and that like it seems like the setup on the last page would be like perfect for it. But I suppose they already had the kiss out of the way in the first part. Did they need to do it here? Perhaps not, but I think some of the very few actual reactions to this book that I've seen is, I think, people wanting there to be another kiss here. Other than that, I think this is fine. I question a little bit the exact wording of like why they had Korra be the one to say "I've been afraid to say something," in that like that was never really set up at all in the book that Korra had any doubts. If it was Asami saying that, I think I could sort of get behind it, because while I don't think she's been like holding back from the relationship, there has been the little bit of like maybe her not being as like eager to want to keep it to make it open or anything like that. So it would have felt a little bit more meaningful coming from Asami. So that's another thing that just adds on to me feeling that like they really don't have a lot of confidence in just giving Asami any sort of a character like issue of her own or anything like that. It always has to be put on Korra to have the little doubts. So I don't even think that was needed. I think it would have been fine if she just kind of came out there and said it confidently, because that would fit, I think, more with her character. Like a little bit of nervousness, but just, you know, with her character, the confidence that she has had in the relationship for like the entire book. Like it almost kind of contradicts with you know, the Tonrock scene where they're referencing like her being so open about it, and Tonrock saying, yeah, maybe you should be a bit private about it, and then Korra's the one to be like, I've been holding this in for a long time. I like what they get to, and that I think Turf Wars has done a fairly good job at kind of getting you invested in the relationship. There's just little things that keep it from being great. But what are your thoughts on this last bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely nice that they have this sort of, you know, last sort of moment together here, and you know the way that they do set up the whole scene, you know, overlooking the portal. I think is definitely nice here. I mean, I don't know, it definitely does seem a bit sort of odd in the fact that you know Korra has been the one who generally has been more open in the relationship than Asami, for the most part here. But I guess it's more sort of the sort of intimate moments here where she's really sort of trying to, you know, confess to Asami and sort of get across her love here, that, you know, she sort of really wants to sort of, I guess, sort of emphasize, you know, her feelings. And I guess, you know, especially with all the sort of recent events here, just sort of, you know, just make it sort of more known here. So it's definitely a nice way to sort of end the book. I mean, they definitely could have, you know, I guess gone a little bit more with it. I can, you know, I don't know. I mean, I guess we'll see more when the sort of mass sort of release, what people will sort of think about sort of the different scenes in here. Because I, you know, definitely would expect it to sort of end on a kiss, just because that's sort of how most of these things sort of end up. So I don't know. It will be interesting to see what more people have to say about that.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that is the end of the book. So yeah, I guess we'll go to some final thoughts on this, and I suppose Turf Wars as a whole, all three parts, how it's come together. Myself, overall, I think it's like I said about part three. I think it's an okay book. I think there's only a handful of scenes across all three parts that I think are particularly notable, that you can really go into a lot of discussion on. I think the only real takeaways from this book are like, yes, giving some development to Korasami as a relationship, then Zhu Li becoming president. Beyond that, everything else feels like not particularly important, in that like I don't really know what the overall direction is for a lot of stuff that's going to come in the future, and that like it seems like there's more setup for Tokuga coming back than basically anything else. Which is why I'd hope in the next comic, which is confirmed, they have confirmed there will be more core comics, just we don't know who the artist is going to be, a title, when it's coming, that sort of stuff. I hope that when they come back, they tell a story that I think the fans will be more interested in, basically. They tell the story the fans want to see, rather than just making up something, bringing in all this new stuff, and so on. So it's been fine, but I don't think it's necessarily been worth waiting close to double the amount of time that a comic would usually take to come out. I don't think it's been that high enough of a quality, and as I said at the start, I think we should expect more, and this didn't quite live up to expectations as much as there's been a lot of hype around it because of the relationship, but I feel in a way that's all there really is to it, and I think that's shown by the fact that the book's been out nearly 2 weeks at this point, and I've only seen maybe 3 people give their opinions on this book, and 2 of those people, it was just talking about the Korasami scenes. So that means like I've only seen one other person apart from you on this podcast, Greg, actually talk about the plot of this book, and I think that's fairly telling, that a lot of people are only really invested in this from the shipping perspective, and I think what they need to get back is the plot stuff, which is overall more interesting to discuss. But what are your overall thoughts on Turf Wars?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of along the lines of what you're saying, that is, it's sort of a nice sort of, I guess, sort of intro type book to sort of get us back into, Korra's timeline of things in the Avatar world here, and sort of, I guess, sort of, I guess, at least begin to sort of set the stage for future events, mainly just revolving around Republic City. I think that's probably the most sort of like, other than just the world itself, which is always cool, and Avatar, just sort of, Republic City and just sort of dealing with those different issues, which, I would hope would be a bigger thing now that we have, Zhu Li in charge here, and just sort of, I guess, some of the immediate sort of possible sort of dangers, sort of out of the way that they developed pretty much just for this sort of story here to give us some sort of conflict. I think, there's definitely a lot more that they can tell, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It definitely seems like the Korosami sort of, I guess, sort of main sort of, I guess, sort of interest in the book is sort of what was, I guess, the initial sort of, draw for this book, which, I mean, I think it's definitely a good way to sort of get people into it. But I think, for the longer sort of haul of these sort of comics, which it seems like they're at least going to do one more sort of series. I think that'll definitely be more beneficial in sort of the long run of things. I mean, I don't know. I think it'd definitely be interesting to see, when this is released more, sort of what more people about it. I mean, I remember the first one was definitely, with all the hype around it, it definitely was really hard to sort of like get your hands on this. And this, even though I did wait a little bit to actually get the physical copy, it definitely wasn't as much an issue sort of acquiring it. So, that definitely, I guess, just shows the difference of, sort of how, I guess, sort of popular in general the book is. I have seen, I've seen a couple people talk about it online on like Tumblr and Reddit and some other places, but definitely, nowhere near the scope as it was before. And, other more recent sort of Avatar news has definitely sort of eclipse anything from this book itself. So I don't know. That definitely is sort of telling of, I guess, sort of some of the fan perception of it. I don't know. Maybe it'll be different in a couple more days when it comes out in wide release, but I don't know if it will be that much more drastic. So there's definitely some work that they can do on it overall, and sort of, I guess, make it more popular as it probably can be.
Yeah, like it's always been a bit of a problem, the kind of dual stage releases of like, yeah, not as many people get it during the comic release window. But as you said, like Turf Wars Part One, and even all of the Avatar comics before then, there was always a little bit more of a reaction than I think there has been to Turf Wars Part Two and Three. Um, I think part of it is definitely the long wait between books. I think people were invested after Part One, but then it took like 8 months for the next part to come out, and then it's been basically 8 months in between parts again. When previously 4 months has always felt pretty lengthy as well, but like more reasonable, and it was just way too long this time out, and I think people
Yeah.
dropped off. In the same way that with like the Korra fandom, it's fair to say like the show was crazy popular with book one, and that 15-month delay between book one and book two kind of split the fandom in half. It was still really big afterwards, but a lot of people were gone and kind of didn't really come back because of such a big delay. And I think it's somewhat telling that like Avatar Spirit, the biggest Avatar forum out there, there is one post in the Turf Wars Part 3 discussion thread of someone actually talking about the book, having read it. Um, I think I saw a thread briefly on Reddit appear on the first couple of pages, but I think it got like 3 comments. And as you say, stuff like the Kyoshi book reveal has way more people talking, and so on. And I think Dark Horse, if it's at all possible, should do everything they can to at least get the digital release in line with the comic book store release, like it is with most single issue comics. I don't know if there's a specific reason behind why it's that way because it's a graphic novel, but if it's at all possible, that would really really help, just so more people can read the book closer to the same time and build hype. Because I think there's just a lot of little problems that come together to mean that the books are so sparsely discussed and so on. Like contrast this to like a season of Voltron comes out, everyone's talking about it because everyone has access to it at the exact same time. Um, but what are your thoughts on that? The kind of I suppose reasons behind like why it isn't being discussed as much.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. I mean, I think part of it probably is just the discrepancies in the actual sort of release here and just sort of where people are, getting comics online or just reading them online or digitally in general. I think is definitely a hard way of sort of, I guess, sort of seeing the reaction all at once. I think that's just one of the main reasons behind it. But that, and then I guess just sort of just general sort of promoting of it and just sort of, just the time it takes to actually come out, which, there's always going to be time in between releases. But I don't know, there should be something that can be done to sort of, keep some hype up about it, in the meantime.
Yeah, and the other thing with this is that like it's not even that the book like wasn't available anywhere to read. Because this had the early release with the Gallery Nucleus event, scans were up, like obviously illegal scans were up really, really early. And like I found them no problem, like just Turf Wars tag on Tumblr, and it was right there. And still there hasn't been a lot of reaction. So as you say, the book is out in 2 days, like officially mass market. I don't have my physical copy yet. I'm assuming it'll get shipped at some point. I think I have it ordered from 2 places, so it'll kind of be the race to see who ships first on that. But I'm looking forward to getting the physical copy. I suppose one thing we didn't discuss was the art, actually. We should probably discuss that now. We've been sort of mixed, I think, on it the first couple of times. I think Iron Co's got better over the course of the books, but I think the same main problems of like inconsistency panel to panel, depending on like how close or far away the character is in shot, kind of remains a bit of a problem. In that, like when it's good, I actually really like it, but I don't think she's able to consistently do every panel like that, and so it feels kind of that only a handful of the pages are like really really good, and the rest of them are just okay. So I'll definitely say there's been a big improvement. I took a look back at some of the part one stuff compared to the part three stuff, and it's pretty noticeable. But I suppose I'm somewhat happy that we're kind of moving on to a different artist. I think mainly because of the scheduling. I don't like to sort of promote the idea that like artists should rush or anything like that. But it did take an excessively long amount of time this for Turf Wars to come out. So if we can get a more consistent artist who potentially has better schedule in terms of getting the books out, that's I think exactly what we need to make core comics kind of work better. But what were your thoughts on the art from Irene Co for part three?
Yeah, no, I think overall it was pretty good. I think, like you said, there can be some inconsistencies, and I think some characters, you notice more of the inconsistencies or just varying different sort of styles, it seems like, as far as just sort of how they look from one section to another. I think that's probably what I noticed particularly. But, overall, I think, it's not bad or anything like that. It's definitely pretty cool. And some of the, especially like the full page spreads, those I think are always really cool. So you can definitely tell where there's, I guess, sort of, it seems like there's more sort of, I guess, effort or just sort of more care taken to some pages versus other. But no, I think overall it's okay. But yeah, I think, the idea with consistency, I think in any sort of thing, if that's possible, I think always sort of helps in the long run for just, keeping things sort of on track and just keeping interest, just there if we, if people, if fans, or if whoever sort of knows that it's going to come out, around the same time, despite, things can always sort of happen, so you can never know for sure. But, having that sort of somewhat level consistency definitely helps as far as, keeping things moving and not sort of waiting around just wondering forever, which can be done, almost sometimes just through communication in general. So it's not always on the artist per se.
Yeah, and also it was a tough act to follow. Irene Co coming after like Gurihuru, who I think in any comics I've read are probably like some of the most consistent artists I've actually ever seen in terms of how clean everything is and consistent it is panel to panel with very few like weird looking panels. So we'll see what they do. I don't think there's even any rumors at this point of like who the next artist is. But all we know is that Mike is staying on as the writer, and that there will be another comic. So that's good to know. When exactly they'll do it, I'm not sure. At this stage, I'm sort of leaning towards, okay, I think I was saying before, like, oh yeah, they'll probably announce it at New York Comic Con. At this point, I'm thinking it's probably a little too early. If what they're saying that they don't really have an announcement to go right now, I feel like Irene Co probably would have talked a little bit more openly if it was like a good deal into production. It feels like it's just like, okay, we know enough to say that they will continue, but that's it. So I suppose the final thing we'll end on is what do we want from the next core comic. For me, I'd like to see us move temporarily at least away from Republic City. I think this one suffered a little bit, I think, from being a little too focused on Republic City. In that, like, all of the other books have, like, you know, to some degree had Republic City stuff, but it was always, it was never as, like, I think, super focused on just the place like it was here, where I think to some degree some of the more minor politics kind of took away from what was going on here. I think we need to see a little bit more of the world. Use one of the biggest strengths that you have going for you with this universe and actually explore the world. I think what most fans would want, if you ask them, is to finally see the Fire Nation in Korra, or to see Zuko, get to see Azumi. There's a new character you get to introduce in Azumi's daughter, who is canon, though we haven't met her yet. Just give a good reason to go to the Fire Nation, and then just create a story there. That way the location, the dynamics, everything's new, it's something the fans want, and there's some decent setup there as well, and that if they're going to commit to the Mako romance with Azumi's daughter, that gives Mako something to do. If Zuko's going to be there, there could be like Zuko trying to go to the spirit world to talk to Iroh. There's lots of stuff going on there. Other than that, there's always the whole like addressing what's up with Kuvira. Is she being put on trial? Is she just in prison? Is anything happening with her? There, I think the two main things that people immediately after book 4 wanted to see more of: Kuvira and the Fire Nation. And I think after Turf Wars not being the best in terms of plot, they probably, I think, should try to please the fans a little bit with what comes next. But what do you want to see, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be cool if they did travel. I mean, I think just traveling the world in general, which is something that we didn't really get to see that much of other than specific places, would be cool just to see, and just to see how it is now after everything that has happened before, I think would be pretty cool. I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess it would be interesting for me too if they did, sort of stay somewhat in Republic City. But I think there is a lot of things that they could do with Republic City and other places as far as trade or just economic sort of benefits that might actually make sense for them to travel on behalf of Republic City to these other places. So that could be a nice sort of segue if they did want to explore the world more.
Yeah, because even if you went to the Fire Nation, I suppose like you could still always have a side plot in Republic City, but like Tenzin and the Airbenders doing stuff with the portal. You can always cut back to Zhu Li, that sort of thing, to see what's happening, and so on. I think there's lots of options, definitely, depending on what way you want to go. I think we're a while off from actually seeing anything about it. It does mean that I think, to some degree, New York Comic Con feels a little up in the air about what's actually going to happen there. Obviously, I think we probably should be expecting preview pages for Imbalance Part 1 at some point. So if they don't happen in the next couple of weeks, then I could see them maybe holding off and revealing them in or around New York Comic Con. And they might have the early announcement of like an artist or the name of the next comic at the next convention. But at this point, what do you think we should expect, if anything, at New York Comic Con for Avatar?
Yeah, no, that's a tough one. I mean, there's so much stuff that's being worked on, but not enough of it to really sort of give us, a whole sort of thing. I mean, I would of course always like a panel that would at least sort of mention some of the stuff that's coming out, or any sort of preview pages, or announcements on like artists and stuff. But they've done that before, and that hasn't exactly worked out. So I'm pretty sure they'll probably be hesitant to sort of try that again like they've done in the past. So I'm not really sure.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think that's mainly everything we want to discuss on this podcast. Now that I remember it, I think I said next week's podcast will be mainly Avatar news. I think one thing we also have to keep in mind is that on the 14th of September is when The Dragon Prince comes out on Netflix. We obviously don't really know what the quality of the show is like, so I don't think we're going to commit right now to just like, yeah, we'll review it. But we'll see how it is once it comes out. We'll probably at the very least talk about like the first episode or something like that on the next podcast. I think we'll commit to still making it Avatar focused, and we'll discuss then, I suppose, if we're actually going to do any coverage on the Dragon Prince. I think they did put out another trailer. I had a quick look at it. It seems a little bit better. I'm still not overly excited for it for some reason. I think they've been doing kind of some weird stuff on social media where they've been kind of oddly secretive about information, just like going over the same little bits over and over again. Like, this character's name is Callum. This other character has a toad and all this sort of stuff. But I suppose, where's your excitement level at with the Dragon Prince at this point?
I mean, it's interesting just because people behind it, but other than that, it's not really that high. I haven't seen the latest trailer or knew anything about it, so it pretty much shows my level.
Yeah, definitely. I'm way more excited to see when they reveal the Voltron Season 8 stuff, which, again, I assume will be at New York Comic Con. So, a couple of things to look forward to, but yeah, I think it'll be an Avatar podcast mainly next time, where we can talk about some of the recent news updates, including going more in depth on the Kyoshi novel and what we think it will cover and stuff like that, because I think there's a lot to talk about with Kyoshi, just what we know already and so on. But yeah, that has been our review for Legend of Korra Turf Wars Part 3. That's been the podcast. It's been myself and Greg. Thanks for listening, and bye.
Bye bye.